The girl was tied to a fence for stealing bread until a silent man cut her free. The town of Burn Hollow didn't flinch at cruelty. It just called it justice and moved on. Midday sun beat down on dirt, packed hard as iron, and there she was, tied to the hitch fence like a stray mule. Small thing, face too thin, jaw set hard, blood crusted below one nostril, and her lip was split, but she stood straight, or tried to. Her hands were tied at the wrists, rope rough and high, forcing her arms above her shoulders. Her ankles had buckled once, knees scraped, but she didn't cry, not even when the baker spat near her and said, "Let that be a lesson." No one asked her name, just called her the girl. No one asked if she was hungry, just said she'd stolen a loaf meant for a child. A town that let its own starve had plenty of rules about bread. Children watched from behind crates. Women walked wide around her. The preacher didn't stop, just muttered a prayer and moved along. The sun sank lower. Sweat dried on her forehead, then turned to chill. Dust caught in the air like ash. The girl blinked hard, once, and didn't again. Then someone else blinked. He stood just off to the side, lean, still. A man with a coat the color of road dust and a silence bigger than his shadow. He didn't speak, didn't scowl, just watched. The wind changed. The girl's hair blew sideways across her bruised cheek. She didn't look at the crowd, but she did look at him. Just once, and he didn't look away. He'd come in just after dawn. No fanfare, no name. Just a rider with dust on his coat and silence in his bones. He didn't tie his horse at the rail, just let it graze along the trough near the well. Folks glanced, then looked away. Burn Hollow didn't bother with strangers unless they caused trouble. He stood with one hand resting on the rail, thumb tracing the worn iron, like it might tell him something. The rest of him didn't move. Not when the baker's son spat near the girl's feet. Not when old Granger barked about examples needing making. Not even when a boy picked up a rock, cocked his arm, and hurled it hard. The stone clipped her shoulder. She grunted. He didn't flinch, just watched. His face was hard to read. Not cruel, not soft. Something in between. Like a ledger, never balanced. The kind of man whose story stayed folded tight inside, creased from years of not telling. His hair was dark, but sun-worn. His jaw unshaven. No badge, no town dust on his boots. Just miles, lots of them. Nobody spoke to him. A few nodded, cautious, but he didn't nod back. Didn't tip his hat, just let the silence settle around him like a coat he never took off. And still, he watched her. The girl at the fence didn't beg. She didn't plead, but once, her gaze lifted, just high enough to meet his. Something passed, not pity, not mercy, just recognition. He didn't move, not yet, but something in the way his hand tightened on the rail said, this wasn't over, not for him, and maybe not for her either. She didn't cry, not even when her knees gave out the second time. Her breath came shallow, tight, through her nose. Dirt streaked her chin where she'd fallen, and the blood on her lip had dried into something she'd stopped feeling. But her eyes stayed open, watching. Not the sheriff, not the ones who laughed and called her bread thief, not the old women who whispered prayers but didn't untie her. No, her gaze wandered past all of them until it found him. He wasn't close. A few steps off, by the rail where the horses kicked at dust and flies, but he didn't shift like the others, didn't look away or pretend not to see. She looked at him like you might look at thunder in the distance, unsure if it was coming closer, but aware it existed, steady, quiet, real. Her eyes held his, not pleading, not searching for rescue, just confirmation that someone else knew this wasn't right, that not everyone walked by. He didn't nod, didn't blink, just stayed there, still as a gate left open. She stared until her vision blurred, and even then she didn't let go. People passed between them, blocking the view for a second at a time. But each time the space cleared, her eyes returned to him, like the thread between them hadn't snapped. He didn't speak. Maybe he couldn't. But whatever lived behind his silence, it met her there, in the space between cruelty and witness. She closed her eyes for just a breath, not from weakness, but from something close to relief. Someone had seen her, not as a thief, not as a girl tied up like punishment was a birthright, just a person, and he hadn't turned away. The sun dipped low, dragging the shadows long across the street. Heat faded slow from the boards of the saloon porch, and the dust turned gold where it drifted through the air. The sheriff spit tobacco, wiped his mouth, and muttered something to no one. Then he walked off, boots heavy. Duty done, or so he figured. The crowd followed in pieces. A few lingered, half curious, half bored. But no one stayed long. Supper waited. So did cards and beer and forgetting. Burn Hollow had a short memory for shame and a long tolerance for cruelty. The girl sagged against the fence. Her breath came in shallow pulls now. No one offered water. No one loosened the ropes. A crust of bread still lay in the dust near her foot, stepped on, forgotten. She hadn't spoken in hours, but the man hadn't moved. He was still there by the rail, hands loose at his sides, no twitch in his fingers, no shifting of his boots. Just a stillness that didn't feel passive. The kind that gathered, the kind that waited. The last light bent through the alleyways, orange on wood and brass. Wind rose slow from the west. It wasn't loud, just enough to stir skirts and lift hats and tug at the girl's hair where it clung to her temple. Enough to carry the scent of blood and dust and the faint sweetness of apple from the orchard beyond town. She stirred. Not much, just her fingers twitching once. And the wind shifted. Not just the weather, but something quieter, older. Like the town had looked away too long, and something had finally decided to look back. Still, he didn't speak, but he was still watching, and he was closer now. When the last boots faded into doorways and laughter turned to music, he stepped forward. No announcement, no flourish, just motion, slow and sure, like a man who didn't question the ground beneath him. The dust barely stirred at his feet. His coat moved with the wind, not against it. Even the horses seemed to quiet. The girl didn't look up. Her head hung now, chin nearly touching the rope between her wrists. But he was watching every breath she drew. Shallow, ragged, still there. He reached the post like it was something sacred, not rushed, not hesitant. His hand moved to his belt, not the gun, but the other side. The knife came free with a whisper of leather. It caught the last of the sun, a flicker, then gone. One cut. The rope dropped. She didn't fall this time. She staggered, caught herself against the wood. Her shoulders curled in like she didn't know what to do with the absence of pain. Her arms dropped slow, numb and tingling. The skin around her wrists was raw and purpled. He didn't speak. She turned her head toward him just slightly. The corner of her mouth twitched like she might try a thank you, but nothing came. He didn't wait for it, just stepped back, knife still in hand, not threatening, not retreating, just present. She took a breath, like it cost something, then another, the kind of breath that said, "I'm not dead, not yet." He nodded once, barely more than a blink, then turned. One slow step, then another, and for the first time since morning, she followed. The rope hit the ground like a whisper. She didn't gasp, didn't bolt like some wild thing turned loose, just sagged, slow and silent, the way something does when it's held upright too long on nothing but will. Her knees folded, scraped the dirt, and she landed hard, but she didn't cry out. He was there before the fall finished, one hand beneath her elbow steadying, not grabbing, not pulling, just there. She flinched once, expecting something rough, maybe, but his grip stayed gentle, like he wasn't lifting a thief, like he was catching something fragile that the world had dropped. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed somewhere far off, maybe the orchard, maybe yesterday, maybe some dream where people didn't tie children to fences for hunger. Her arms hung useless at her sides, wrists red and swollen. Her lip had split wider in the fall, but she didn't wipe it, just breathed. He crouched beside her, didn't speak, didn't motion, just waited until her body decided to remember it could move. She didn't thank him, couldn't. Her throat was dry and thick with dust, but her eyes flicked sideways, brief, trembling, and in them lived a question she wasn't ready to ask. His response was only stillness. The saloon door creaked behind them. Laughter spilled out. No one saw, or pretended not to. He reached into his coat, pulled out a cloth, and pressed it once to her bleeding lip. She didn't move away. He stood, then offered a hand. She stared at it like it was a trick, or maybe a lifeline. Then she took it. The world didn't shift. The town didn't change. But she stood, and he didn't let go. She leaned on him as they walked, legs shaking from too little food and too much time tied upright. The saloon faded behind them, laughter thinning into nothing. Her breath came in sharp pulls, but she didn't complain, didn't speak, just kept one arm pressed to her ribs like something inside her might break if she moved too fast. They reached the alley's edge before she stopped. Her hand, scraped and trembling, slipped into the fold of her dress. From beneath the dirty hem, she pulled a cloth bundle. It was small, tied with twine. She unwrapped it with care, as if it might fall apart if handled wrong. Half a loaf of bread, crushed, but whole enough. She held it out to him. Her face didn't change. There was no apology, no shame, just a quiet offering. Like maybe she thought he'd earned it. Rescue and trade for food, or maybe it was all she had left to give. He looked at it, then at her. Her wrist still bled where the rope had bit deep. Her cheekbone jutted sharp under skin drawn too tight. The fabric around her knees was torn and stained with dirt and something darker. She was thinner than the bread. He shook his head, slow and firm. A refusal not of her, but of the idea that this was payment, that kindness needed balance. She hesitated, then wrapped the bread again, slower this time, like it deserved more care. She tucked it back into her pocket. His hand stayed near her elbow as they walked on, not guiding, just near. The alley spilled into a lane lined with broken fences and quiet trees. She followed him without question, and for the first time that day, she didn't feel like a thief. They didn't move fast. There was no need. The girl's steps were small, uneven, like her feet had forgotten how to land without flinching. He matched her pace. No rush, no words. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was protection. They passed the well, then the tailor's darkened shop. The church sat hunched in shadow, its bell tower leaning slightly from storm rot. The preacher stood on the steps, arms folded. He saw them, said nothing, just turned and went back inside. One window flickered with lamplight. A curtain twitched. But no doors opened, no boots followed, no one called out. They walked as though wrapped in a different air, one thicker than wind, older than law. It kept people inside and questions behind teeth. Maybe the town thought it didn't matter anymore. Maybe they decided the bread had been paid for in bruises. Or maybe they saw the way he walked beside her, how he didn't touch her, didn't guide her, but stayed close enough that the space between them felt deliberate, felt claimed, and no one dared test that. On Jaisri, the saloon music played on. A piano struck a wrong note, and laughter followed. But behind it, the world stretched quiet. Dust rose at their heels, soft as ash. She didn't ask where they were going. He didn't offer. The street narrowed into a lane flanked by dying apple trees. The sun, low and red now, caught in the branches like threadbare ribbon. She glanced at him once. Not in fear, not in thanks, just checking that he was still there. He was. And in a town that turned away, that was more than enough. The path curved past the last fence, then veered into trees, gone soft with rot and memory. Apple limbs hung low, some bare, some clinging to wrinkled fruit that no one had picked in years. The wind moved through them, like it remembered what they used to be. He led her down the rutted track without turning once. She followed, steps light, hands tucked close to her chest. The bread was still in her pocket. She hadn't eaten. Not yet. The cabin appeared like a secret, small, slanted, half sunk into the hill. Its porch leaned, boards warped, but the windows glowed faint with firelight. Smoke curled from the chimney, not thick, just enough to say someone lived there. He stepped up first, opened the door, didn't motion for her to follow, just left it open. She didn't enter, not yet. Instead, she sat on the porch steps. Slowly, like her bones still expected pain, she let her hands rest on her knees, her fingers curled tight. He came back a minute later, Not with questions, not with expectations, but with a tin cup of water and a blanket worn soft at the edges. He set them both beside her, sat on the far end of the steps, far enough for her to breathe, close enough to be there. The stars hadn't come out yet, but the sky was already forgetting its color. The trees creaked behind them. She didn't drink at first, just stared into the cup like it might disappear. Then she sipped. She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect it. He leaned back, arms resting on his knees, gaze fixed somewhere past the orchard. The silence between them stretched wide, but it didn't feel empty. The sky cleared slow, like a curtain lifting off glass. Stars burned sharp and cold, too many to count, too bright to soften. The kind of night that made you feel watched, even when no one was there. She sat with her knees drawn up, blanket around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the darkness between the branches. The cup rested empty beside her boot. She hadn't moved much, neither had he. He lit no lamp, just stirred the coals inside with care, then came back to the porch and lowered himself down again. No words, not even the kind people use when they mean to fill silence. He didn't fill it. He shared it. She didn't ask his name, not because she wasn't curious, but because some things lose their meaning when spoken too soon. She didn't want to know the name of a man who might disappear with morning, and he didn't offer it, like he understood. Her eyes drifted once toward him, met his. Only for a second, then away again. He nodded once. That was enough. The wind picked up, threading its way through the dead fruit trees, shaking loose a few withered apples that thudded softly in the dirt. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. The fire inside the house crackled. The stars didn't blink. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, not yet, but like someone remembering something gentle, something not stolen. He watched her for a while, then leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes too. The porch held them both, not together, not apart. Just two souls who hadn't asked for anything, and, for once, hadn't been asked to explain. The storm rolled in after midnight, slow at first, just wind whispering through orchard limbs and loose boards. Then the rain came, heavy and sudden, slapping the roof like it meant to tear it off. Thunder followed, low and close, the kind that vibrated through bone. She didn't stir. She'd curled herself tight beneath the coat he'd left draped over her, the patchy blanket still wrapped beneath it. Her breath came soft and steady, like waves smoothing over sand. Her lips parted just slightly, a streak of dried blood still clinging to the corner. He sat near the window inside, the glow of the fire painting his boots red gold. He didn't sleep, just watched through the glass, head tilted slightly toward her shape on the porch. The lightning lit her face sometimes, pale, fragile, but calm. He'd seen men flinch at less. She didn't even twitch. The water pooled on the steps, leaked through the eaves in one place. He checked the ceiling, watched the door, waited. At one point, he moved to the threshold, opened it gently. The wind caught the edge of his coat and whipped it like a flag. She didn't move. He bent low, lifted her slightly, just enough to slide a folded sack beneath her so the water wouldn't soak through. His hand lingered at her shoulder longer than it needed to. Still, no flinch, no fear. He closed the door again and leaned against it, back to the storm. She slept straight through, as if her body had decided, just this once, not to run, not to guard, not to expect the blow, just rest. Thunder cracked again, and still she didn't wake, not even when the world shook. Morning came gray, the kind that made the trees look like ghosts and the ground like ash. She was still sleeping when the knock came, 3 hard raps that shook the door like a threat, not a question. He didn't answer right away, just stood from the chair slow, brushed ash from his sleeve, and stepped to the door. His boots made no sound on the floorboards. She stirred once on the porch, eyes still closed, pulling the coat tighter around her. Outside stood the sheriff, rein still clinging to the brim of his hat. 2 men flanked him, rough sorts with rifles slung lazy over their backs, like they expected something easy. "She ran," the sheriff said. "Took bread from Mercer's boy. Town wants her back. Rules are rules." He didn't respond. One of the men added. Can't just take him walk. Still nothing. He stood there filling the doorway, not tall but rooted, a shadow shaped like defiance. He didn't touch the rifle leaning just behind him. Didn't need to. The sheriff's jaw tightened. This ain't your fight. But his eyes said different. The girl behind him hadn't cried once, hadn't begged. That meant something, maybe everything. She's a thief, the other man muttered. His gaze didn't shift. Not a step back, not a word spoken. Just that silence again, thick as winter, heavy as judgment. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then the sheriff shifted, eyes narrowing. You really want to stake your peace on her? No answer, only stillness, and sometimes that says more than shouting ever could. The sheriff spat in the dust, turned. The men followed, and he closed the door without a sound. Their footsteps faded into the wet hush of morning, boots sinking into mud that remembered everything. The rain had stopped, but the air still hung heavy, like the sky hadn't made up its mind. From the porch, she watched the figures retreat. The sheriff, the others, all of them smaller now. She didn't speak right away. He stood inside, back to the door, hands at his sides, breath slow. The quiet filled the cabin, not empty, not cold, just full of something she didn't yet know how to name. Then she rose. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, but she didn't reach for it. Her bare feet touched the porch boards, skin pale against the wood. She stepped through the open doorway and stood just inside, the hem of her dress still damp. Why? She whispered. He didn't turn, didn't move, but his hands, one of them, shook just once, like something long locked away had come loose without asking. She noticed. Not the way someone notices a weakness, but the way you notice weather shifting. A warning, a truth. She took a breath that tasted like dust and pine smoke. Her voice came again, thinner this time. You don't even know me. Still, he said nothing. But she watched his face, the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes never met hers, as if he carried a shame that didn't belong to her, but still echoed in the room between them. She didn't press, didn't cry. She just stood there in that space he had carved out of violence and silence and left untouched, for her. And in that stillness, something softer bloomed. She heard it, not his words, but the silence he gave her, and she understood it wasn't empty. The sky was gray that evening, not storm gray, just the kind that feels full of old things, regret, dust, memory. The trees barely moved. Even the birds were quiet, as if listening. They sat out back by the well, not close, not far. She had her knees pulled to her chest, chin resting on them. His coat still hung off her shoulders, sleeves bunched at the elbows. He sat on an overturned bucket, whittling a small stick to nothing. Not for the shape, just for the motion. She hadn't spoken in a while. Then she did. It's Nora, she said, soft, like the name might still break in her mouth. My name. She didn't look at him when she said it, just stared out past the orchard, where a single crow sat in a crooked branch. He didn't speak, just paused, knife in mid-draw, like he'd heard something holy. She shifted. I haven't said it in a while, not since... before. She didn't explain, didn't need to. The bruises still spoke, even as they faded. He looked at her then, not startled, just steady, present. And he nodded once. No questions, no praise, just acceptance, like she'd handed him something fragile, and he knew how to hold it without breaking it. Nora. It sat between them now, not heavy, not loud. A thing returned. A thing that mattered. She breathed easier after that, just slightly. The wind picked up enough to stir the grass. The stick in his hand snapped near the end. He let it fall. She didn't speak again, but when he stood, she stood too. And this time, when she followed him back toward the house, it wasn't because she had nowhere else to go. It was because someone had finally said nothing, and still heard her. The next morning came soft. Light filtered through the orchard leaves, casting dappled gold across the porch boards. Inside the cabin, the wash basin steamed. She stood over it, sleeves rolled, cheeks flushed pink from scrubbing. The dirt came off in streaks. The bruises stayed, but something underneath them started to return. She dressed in clothes he'd folded neatly on the cot. Nothing fine, just cotton and wool, worn but clean. They hung a little loose, but she didn't seem to mind. Her hair, now dry, fell in waves down her back until she tied it into a braid, fingers slow, practiced. The bread was gone. She'd eaten every crumb with hands that trembled and eyes that didn't. He was outside, hammering a new rail into place. The old one had rotted halfway through and gave when he leaned on it yesterday. She stepped down the porch, didn't ask to help, just picked up the second hammer and took her place. They didn't speak, but the rhythm of their work filled the silence with something better than words. She held the wood steady. He drove the nails clean. Her braid slipped loose over one shoulder. Dust clung to her boots. At midday, he brought her half an apple from the cellar and watched her eat it slow, bite by bite, as if remembering what taste was. When he handed her a canteen, their fingers brushed. She didn't flinch. And later, when the wind picked up and a bird startled from the trees, just for a moment, small and sudden, she laughed. Only once. But it cracked the stillness like spring breaking through. He didn't smile, not exactly. But his eyes did, and that was enough. The orchard came back first. Buds on branches no one had tended, petals pale and trembling in the breeze. The ground, once packed hard from frost and silence, softened beneath their boots. Grass grew in crooked patches. A robin nested in the gutter and sang like it had always belonged. He fixed the last post of the fence in early March, hammering it straight with careful hands. The rope was long gone, burned one quiet night in the hearth, neither of them speaking as it turned to ash. The fence still stood, weathered and gray, but it held no memory of binding. Just wood now, nothing more. She moved freer these days, steady, sun on her skin, sleeves rolled, hair braided loose down her back. She spoke little, but when she did, it was with voice, not whisper. She mended the garden rows, picked early herbs, fed the chickens even when the rooster bit. He never asked her to stay, never needed to. At dusk, they sat on the porch, him with a mug of black coffee, her with a shawl pulled around her shoulders. The orchard lit up in gold, and the wind played low through the branches like it was humming a song just for them. They didn't touch, didn't lean close, but they didn't need to. She glanced at him once, and he glanced back. No smile, just the kind of look that says, "I see you." And she nodded, like that was enough. Some nights, the stars came out before the light was fully gone. Some nights, the ghosts of what had been walked quiet between the trees. But no one was tied, and no one ran. They stayed, two shadows resting in the light they'd made.